Okay, so I think we've got quite a few people in. So I think I'll probably start. If you could all put your hands up, give me a signal that you can hear me. That'd be great. Can you all hear me? Yep. And can you see the screen? Can you see?
Yes.
Yep. Excellent. Right. Okay. So I've gathered you all here today really to kind of share some important information. I think this is very important for us to look at this. I think what we're actually experiencing here is a huge breakthrough from the Scandinavian group, and basically what I'm going to be doing here is kind of going through some of the things that I think are the underlying causes of disease, and once we can address the underlying cause of disease, we can then set about trying to find out ways we can solve those problems. So for all of those of you who don't know who I am, I'm actually a former medical doctor. I used to work in the emergency department, A&E. I worked there for about 20 years. And then I moved on to naturopathy, where I studied nutrition. And from then on, I started to look into various different ways in which we could tackle ailments. For those of you who don't know what naturopathy is, it's basically a study which looks into looking at natural ways of treating individuals with ailments. Looking at natural ways you look at food, look at nutrition, look at all the other things. Medicine tends to cover things like surgery. Pharmaceutical industry is quite important there, and also psychotherapy. That's how I would sum up medicine. But I think there are other ways we can look at doing things, and it's becoming more popular with the people because I think people realize that a lot of these drugs can cause a lot of side effects. So it's important for us to kind of look at alternative ways in which we can treat ailments. And what I propose to do here is to try and show you an example of how that can be put into practice and how it can benefit us. So without further ado, we're going to begin this presentation. So what we see here, back in 2004, there was a magazine, Time magazine, which actually identified that one of the leading causes of a lot of these diseases was inflammation, chronic inflammation. And what we see here is that this chronic inflammation can actually lead to advanced aging. It can speed up aging. And a lot of these major causes of death are things like heart attacks, cancer. We see now a lot of Alzheimer's patients who, as they're getting older, they're suffering from dementia and all these various other things. The list goes on, and we'll come back and look at some of those in a little bit more detail, because I think if you understand the root cause of why these are going on, then you'll understand the disease process. And if you understand the disease process, we can also understand ways in which we can tackle those issues. So I can actually put this down, and what I'd like to do here as well is I'd like to give thanks to Dr. Paul Clayton, who's actually helped provide some of these information for us to learn from. So a lot of this comes from a lot of his work as well. He's actually a doctor who spent a lot of time looking into this and so looking at things from a pharmaconutritional point of view. So this is important for us to understand the mechanisms for what our relationship is with food and all these other various things. And what it boils down to is that we can pinpoint the causes of these diseases by what I call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So the first one is dysbiosis. Dysbiosis is where we see cellular disruption in the gut. And when I say gut, I'm talking about from the mouth all the way to the anus, and we'll cover some of that in detail. We also have chronic inflammation, which is, you're going to learn about something called the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. We talk about type B malnutrition, which is where people who end up becoming obese and large, they also have a high risk of perpetuating that inflammation. And the last thing is glycemic mismatch, which is where our blood sugar can sometimes become not under control. And as a result of that inability to control our sugar levels because of what we eat and what we're exposed to, we actually end up going down the pathway of becoming chronically inflamed as a result of our relationship with foods and what have you. So what's been happening over the last 30 years? Well, over the last 30 years, we've seen a massive change in the way that we eat, in terms of the food that we eat, in terms of the quality of the food that we eat, and it's impacted our cellular function. And I'm going to demonstrate that here. So it's important for us to understand in how this has happened. Days have gone now where we rely on our fruit and veg and our meats. This was a staple diet. This is what we were used to. What's happened over the years now is that we rely on fast food. We live in a society which is very demanding. So the food that we eat is something that we need to eat on the go. Some of these foods have now become an industry. And the result of becoming an industry, there is only really one obligation that these food companies have, which is to make profit. And by making profit, they have managed to find ways in which they can make our foods very attractive. And they've created ways in which we can actually allow the food to last longer. And we've actually found ways in which we can actually make the food taste very pleasant, and will practically allow us to become addicted to it. And if we're addicted to foods and we want more foods, then we're going to keep on going back for it. And this is one of the major travesties in our society, because what that's done is it's also become the source of media, the source of political, and all of these other things. And when you start to introduce all of this, it really starts to alter the way we live. But what we should be doing is looking at how these are affecting our lives. And what I hope to do in this presentation is to show you exactly what's going on. So I want you to have a look at this. So first of all, let's go back to what it was like back before Christ. Before Christ, in Mesoamerica, the kind of foods that we used to eat were things like agave, legumes, maize, nopals. You probably haven't heard of any of these things. Not now, not in our lifestyle. But what it is that these are all fibers. Yeah, one of the biggest things that we are, one of the largest food groups that we are lacking is fiber. In those days, one would get at least 135 grams of prebiotic fiber per day. Now, what do I mean by prebiotic? Well, prebiotic means that these foods, these carbohydrates, as you are, they do not get absorbed by us. We don't consume that. We don't take those sugars in. We don't break down those fibers. Those fibers are specifically for helping the biotic. Biotic means bacteria. What are we talking about? We're talking about the good and bad bacteria. Now, what I mean by this is that our bodies, we have 37 trillion cells in our bodies. But what we also have in our bodies, in our gut, is we have what's known as the microbiota. Now, what is the microbiota? This is basically an environment laden with bacteria, all of which are supposed to live in synergy with us and benefit us by breaking down foods that we don't normally break down. And by us benefiting from them, what they get out of it is they get somewhere to live. And what we get out of it is we get all the nutrients that we need. So what used to happen back in the day is we used to get at least 135 grams of prebiotic fiber a day. What has happened now, in the 19th century, we were getting at least 20 to 40 grams of prebiotic fiber a day through something called Helianthus tuberosus, which is actually Jerusalem artichoke, and also from legumes. So these prebiotic fibers, what they do is they would ensure that our gut was healthy. And what do I mean by that? I mean the environment. So when we look into the bowel now, we're looking at the colon. What we have is we have all of these bacteria, and we have good bacteria and bad bacteria. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is that we have a population of bacteria which are going to be beneficial for us, and we're going to have a population of bacteria which are not good for us. And how do we distinguish between the two? Well, there was a chap who actually invented something called a stain. And these are called gram stains. And what happened is that you could tell the difference between one group of bacteria and another group of bacteria by the coating of the bacteria. And some of these coatings contain something called liposaccharides. And these liposaccharides, what happens is that those that contain the liposaccharides, which is very waxy material, they don't get stained. And when they don't get stained, they're called gram-negative bacteria. Now, just to complicate things, you're going to have gram-negative bacteria, which are good for us, and gram-negative bacteria, which are bad for us. But most of the gram-negative bacteria, because they have that coating, they will behave in a different way. The gram-positive bacteria, which are the ones which are stained, they tend to be wholly better for us. And why is that? Well, we'll go into that in a second. But before we go into that, I want to mention that in the 21st century, I want you to see the difference from back in before the Christ's time, 19th century time. You can see how much fiber we're getting. 15 grams of total fiber in our diet. And this is according to statistics that we got from North America. And of 1/3 of that is prebiotic fiber. So it just goes to show we've gone from 135 grams to 3.5 grams. So you can see now that there is clearly going to be an impact on the way in which the environment of our gut is. So what do we have in our gut? What are these bacteria, what are these fibers or these prebiotics fibers doing? Well, what they're actually doing is when they go through our system, they end up in the colon. And in our colon, we have all these bacteria. And what we have is we are trying to feed the good bacteria. And these bacteria are the lactobacilli, bifidobacteria. We got this one called fecal bacterium prosnitzi. There are various different names of bacteria which we have. Now, what is the benefit of these particular bacteria? Well, these are all the gram-positive bacteria that I talked about. And what they do is they take in these prebiotic fibers, which we absorb, and they break those things down and they produce something called butyrate and propionate. And these particular products are beneficial for us. And they also produce bactericidins, microsomal messenger RNA, and something called MAMPs, which are microbial associated molecular patents. Now, what is the benefit of these? I will demonstrate that in the next slide. But it's important that you understand that what we're doing here is we're feeding these gram-positive bacteria so that they stay in our system and benefit us in the long term. If we don't feed these bacteria will die. And what we get is we get an overgrowth of the bad bacteria. And then there is a fight in that environment where you get gram-negative bacteria taking over the area, and then they start to attack our system. So traditionally, we have used to having a gram-positive dominant bacteria in our gut. But since we started to change our food diet, because we don't have these fibers, what's happening is the good bacteria or the gram-positive bacteria are dying, and the gram-negative bacteria are taking over. And some of these include colonies such as Bacteroides. And what these have done is that there is a relationship between those bacteria and a tenfold increase in non-communicable disease processes or non-communicable degenerative disease. And what do I mean by that? I mean chronic illness. So we'll go to the next slide and I'll show you how this is working, because then if you understand this, then you can understand where we're coming from. So what we have is we have a situation like this. So this is actually a cross-section of our gut. And what you see on the left side is you see all of these green gram-positive bacteria. So what happens is that the fibers, they get into there and they feed these gram-positive bacteria, and they tend to stay within the lumen of the gut. Now, the lumen of the gut is more towards going further upwards, and towards the outside of the gut, which is where our cells are, which are where our colonocytes are. That is where absorption takes place. And all of these little these projections that you see coming off the cell, these are called microvilli. And what happens is that these gram-positive bacteria tend to stay towards the lumen. They don't have any interaction with any of these cells, which is a good thing. And what happens is that they produce these byproducts that we talked about, like MAMPs and what have you. And what they try to do is they ensure that our body maintains a balance between innate immunity and the immunity which allows us to be able to adapt. So our adaptive immunity and our innate immunity is in balance when this scenario is in place. And as you can see, because the bacteria don't attack any of these cells, then these cells are happy. So this is a happy system. Now, if I pass your attention onto the right side of this slide, you will see now that what's happened here is that we don't have the fibers feeding these bacteria. The gram-positive bacteria, which are the green ones, start to die out, and we get an overgrowth of these red gram-negative bacteria. Now, the gram-negative bacteria behave in a slightly different way. They don't have the carbohydrate-consuming effects. What they do is they work on pepsins, or they work on peptides. So they will actually start to attack our colonocytes, and they will start to break down the cells in our gut to the point where they can even start to interfere with the gap junctions, which are these little junctions that you see between the cells. So you see these little blue fibers or these blue connections, they start to attack that. And what you get is something called leaky gut. And as a result, a lot of the things that we consume in our food end up getting into the bloodstream, and they will cause havoc. They get into our bloodstream, they attack the system, and this is what is connected with chronic disease. That's why in the last slide, when I said to you, you get a gram-positive overgrowth, you get a 10% increase in non-communicable disease processes, and that is where the problem is. So the idea is that the more fiber we get in our diet, we can actually point more towards the left side rather than the right side. And on the right side, you'll see that what you're getting here is a production of interleukin-18. You get an production of LL37. Some of these things are associated with cancer. Some of these things are associated with breakdown of our system inside, because when they get consumed, they get into the bloodstream, and they can start attacking things like all the other major organs of the body. So it's very important that we know the distinction between physiological inflammation, which is on the left side, which is maintained by having these gram-positive bacteria, versus pathological inflammation and neuroinflammation. Neuroinflammation, you don't want to go there, because once these things start to get across the blood-brain barrier and start causing problems in our brain, we can start to list a whole load of neurological diseases, which we will go into, and you will know now. So pay attention to this slide, because later on when we start looking at some of the neurological illnesses, you'll be able to know that this is one of the reasons why that's happening. So how can we solve this problem? So the way to solve this problem is by basically changing our diet. Now, there is a company which provides solutions to these, and they're called Zinzino. And Zinzino have provided a special type of supplement which we can take, which provides fiber. And if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, I've listed them here. These are called fructooligosaccharides, inulin, oat beta-glucans, and resistant starch. What is the difference between these? The difference is that the fructooligosaccharides are a very small chain. So what that means is that the order in which they get absorbed or broken down by the bacteria is they start off with the small chains. So what you see in the top right-hand corner here is the bowel, which I just had on. Yeah. So if we look at the bowel, how the bowel is shaped, you have what's known as the ascending colon, which is just here. You have the transverse colon, the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and then you have the rectum. So what happens is that the small chain carbohydrates will start to ferment in the ascending colon. And then the next one, inulin, and the other polysaccharide, which is the oat beta-glucans, they will start to ferment in the transverse colon and the descending colon. And then the last one, which is the starch from green bananas, which is the resistant starch, they tend to start to ferment in the sigmoid colon and down. So by having this mixture of these fibers, what you're effectively going to be able to do is to convert the whole of that colon into a more pleasing environment full of gram-positive bacteria, which is going to help to help us in the long run. Now, the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, have done a study back in 2019 where they looked at the relationship between having high fiber intake and some of the disease processes. Bowel cancer, for example, is reduced by 25% if you have a high fiber diet. Breast cancer reduced by 20%. Heart attacks, 25%. Stroke, 25%. There have been additions to this. Dementia is down by 25%. So a lot of these things can be reduced by actually increasing our fiber intake. Now, they have suggested that we should be getting at least 25 to 29 grams of fiber a day. And we've already suggested that you get at least a quarter of that, which is prebiotic. And 15 grams is 3.5. So by that definition, 30 grams is 7 grams. So we should be getting at least 7 grams of prebiotic fiber in our diet. What Zinzino have done is if you have 2 scoops, that's equivalent to 12 grams. So they've gone over and above. So clearly what they've done is they've provided one of the best solutions. By providing these prebiotics, you can essentially convert your whole colon into a pleasing environment, which will benefit you and reduce all of these ailments and disease processes very effectively. At the moment, 9 out of 10 of us don't even get enough fiber. So the fact that we can actually address this problem by taking at least 12 grams of prebiotics a day, we can actually solve that problem. And this is the product. It's called Zinzino Xenobiotic. They contain 5 of the natural food fibers. It's metabolized in the large colon, as we said, supports the operation of those useful bacteria, and it feeds and restores our healthy flora and fauna so that we can actually benefit from that in the long run. And it also optimizes a healthy cholesterol level, reduces the blood sugar level, which is what we mentioned earlier about the glycemic mismatch. And it also cleans all the 5 sections of the digestive system. And this can retail at 25 euros a month if you get this. And I think it's very important that you follow the system and at least take this on a daily basis. So this is what's an essential gut addressing issue. Now we move on to the next, which is chronic inflammation. So chronic inflammation, as I said before, I mentioned to you about the foods. What we've done is we've changed the way we eat. We've changed the foods. And what's happened is that we tend to have a lot of these edible oils. And these edible oils, what they do is they boost your omega-6. Now, omega-6 is basically what's known as the essential fatty acids. So just as vitamins are essential, these fatty acids are also essential. It means our life depends on it. Oxygen that we breathe every day is essential. So these are essential fatty acids. 50% of the consumed calories come from these, and they are processed. These foods are processed several ways through these mechanisms: extrusion, hydrogenation, which is providing more hydrogen bonds to the carbohydrate in the carbs that we eat; emulsification, stabilizers, which you sometimes have in tablets and various food additives. These are all full of omega-6. And these contain all the constituents that are heavily manipulated. So semi-processed foods, soda, crisps, ice cream, sweetened breakfast cereals, all of these foods that we eat, breakfast cereals, all of these things, they contain omega-6. Now, omega-6 is important, but in moderation. Now, on the right-hand side, we have the omega-3s, which are non-processed foods, vegetables, fish, and algae. This tells you now that these are the kinds of foods which will actually boost our omega-3. Now, if we go back into the history, what we find is that the omega-3, so if you look at down below, you'll see N6 and N3 underneath the saturated fats. So you've got total fats, you've got saturated fats, you've got N3 and N6. Now, the omega-6s and the omega-3 historically were always around about 2 or 3 to 1. What happened was, around about the 1850s or 1900s, we saw a massive change in that relationship. What we saw was the Industrial Revolution. And during the Industrial Revolution, they managed to start to process a lot of these oils, producing these edible oils. So we see a massive increase in omega-6s and a massive decline in omega-3s. Why did we see a massive decline in omega-3s? Because fish and those foods like oysters and all these things start to become expensive. and people can't afford it. So what people do is they start to gravitate more towards having these processed foods, and that's the reason why we see a massive disparity between the relationship between N6, omega-3, and omega-6s, of which omega-6 is what we're getting more of, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is related to coronary artery disease and all of the other disease processes which we're going to look into. And I'll be able to explain to you at the cellular level why that is the case. So, who are these omega-6s and omega-3s? Well, we got to go right back down to the cell. Now, nutritionists, doctors, and what have you, we all have our own belief system. A lot of us disagree about things that we've learned. But one thing that we can do is it's important for us to come to common terms and try to see it through each other's eyes. The way we come to common terms is by going right down to basics. And if anybody who's attended any of my lectures, they'll always tell you that if you want to get to common terms, you have to go down to the molecular and cellular level. So, what is the cell? Well, we have here a cell in front of us. And what we see here is we have a cell which is composed of what's known as a bilipid layer, which you'll see around the border of the cell. Now, this border here contains what's known as phospholipids. They have what's known as a water resistant side and a water loving side. And the water resistant side is in the middle of this bilayer. So what happens is that all of these phospholipids, they all line up around the cell and they produce this wall, this very convenient wall. Now this cell is dependent on the structure of that wall. And that wall is made of saturated fats, of which there are two types, palmitic and stearic. Actually, there are more different types of fat, of these essential fatty acids. But for the purpose of this lecture, I'm only going to concentrate on these 11 fatty acids because the test which is done tests for these things. These 11 fatty acids are actually what Zinzino actually provide a test to test what level these are in your body. So it's important that we familiarize ourselves with each of these. And there are 4 different groups. You've got the saturated fat group, you've got the omega-9 group, you've got the omega-6 group, and you've got the omega-3 group. The 2 that we're most interested in is the omega-6 group and the omega-3 group, because the relationship between this is what has allowed us to understand how the disease processes are. So if you look at the omega-6, we've got linoleic acid, gamma-linoleic acid, arachidonic acid, and this dihomo-gamma-linoleic acid. Now, arachidonic acid is the one which is the most abundant. This particular one is very important for our cascade when it comes to clotting cascade, and also providing a pro-inflammatory response. And this is very important. So omega-6 is important to that degree. However, when we start to overdo this, then it becomes chronic. Now, the omega-3s on the right-hand side, you've got ALA, alpha-linoleic acid, eicosapentaenoic acid, DPA, and DHA. Now, EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, they convert into something called eicosanoids, and these are also anti-inflammatory. The arachidonic acid, the omega-6s are pro-inflammatory, so they cause inflammation. But the relationship between the two is what will determine whether or not we are pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory. Now, the other thing is that the cell, which we talked about, the cell membrane, are composed of each and every one of these type of fatty acids. Now, if we see a disparity, as in we see more omega-6s and less omega-3 in this cell membrane becomes less fluid. Now, what do I mean by less fluid? What I mean by that is that when you have a structure of anything, you want to know that that structure can also be slightly malleable so that it can take in nutrients and things like toxins can get out. If that membrane becomes less fluid, that membrane becomes hard. And when it becomes hard, toxins can't get out and nutrients can't get in. And this is one of the reasons. So I want you to think, for example, an example of this would be like a building. Take, for example, the Eiffel Tower, or take something like the Burj Khalifa. The Burj Khalifa is a huge structure, but in order for that Burj Khalifa to be able to survive, it needs to be slightly malleable. although it's a strong structure, it needs to be able to move because of the winds, because of the high winds, because of all of the weathering. It has to be able to absorb all of that. And that is what our cell membranes do. But if we change that ratio between the omega-3 and omega-6, it becomes harder. Now, as I said to you before, we have approximately 37 to 72 trillion cells in our body. These cells make up very important parts of our body. For example, our vascular system. So you can see now that if, for example, the cell membranes become hard, what do you think is going to happen to the walls that contain those cells? The wall is going to get harder. And if the walls of the circulatory system become hard, what does that lead to? High blood pressure. So it's important that we make sure that our cellular membranes are fluid. And how do we do that? By making sure that we are taking in foods that address that ratio between omega-3 and omega-6. If we continue going down the path that we've been going, where we take in a high level of omega-6 and low levels of omega-3, what do you think is going to happen to our cell membranes? What do you think is going to happen to our joints? What do you think is going to happen to all of those ligaments and all those major cellular material that we have in our body? They're going to get harder, and that leads to disease. DHA, that's another one here on the under the omega-3. DHA is a very, very important constituent of our brain cells. DHA is what enables our cell membranes of our brain cells to be at a level where the communication between our brain cells are optimal. So if our DHA goes down, what do you think happens to our brain? Our brain cells will not be able to communicate with each other properly. We will lose the functionality. One of the major purposes of a cell is to produce product. So now you can think of this cell as the Amazon warehouse. The Amazon warehouse has to ship product out. If the products don't get out, then what happens to those people? They don't get what they need. So in the same way, cell, which produces products, if those hormones or those secondary messengers or those products that come out of the cell don't get out, then that is also going to be another deficiency. Think, for example, people who have sleep problems. One of the things that we produce in our brain is something called melatonin that helps us sleep. So just imagine if you don't have enough DHA in your cell membrane and it upsets the fluidity of the membrane, what do you think is going to happen to those products? You're not going to get enough melatonin and you're not going to get enough sleep. So this is how the structure, you can see that by just looking at this slide alone, this slide paints pictures of every single disease process by just understanding the fact that this cell membrane is becoming disrupted as a consequence of not having enough omega-3 and omega-6. And the saturated fat is what actually gives the rigidity or the rigidity of the actual membrane. The omega-3 and omega-6 allows it to be more flexible and allows it to allow nutrients in and toxins out. So now the next slide tells us a little bit more about the relationship between omega-3 and omega-6. On the left-hand side, we have an equal amount of omega-3 and omega-6. If you look at the bilipid membrane at the top, you'll see that there's an inflammatory challenge. You have EPA and DHA in the cell membrane. You have arachidonic acid, which is the omega-6 on the left-hand side. And what we see here is we see pro-inflammation has increased, pro-inflammatory because of the arachidonic acid, which is like what's known as the acceleration pedal. And on the right-hand side, you have the anti-inflammatory, which are like the brakes. So when a process occurs, like for example, some sort of inflammatory change, you will have this response, but then at least then you have the EPA and DHA byproducts, which allow to inhibit the pro-inflammatory occurrence. So it's important to have inflammation as well as anti-inflammatory abilities in order to be able to develop. So for example, when you exercise, your muscles do a lot of work and they produce a lot of lactic acid and the cellular function becomes damaged to a certain extent. That's what we're effectively doing every time we go to the gym. Or when we exercise a cell, those muscles will become damaged. Now, those damaged muscles is a consequence of inflammation, but at least we have the anti-inflammatory to try and heal and regenerate and continue and become stronger. What happens on the right-hand side now is we have a slightly different situation where we have a preponderance of omega-6s. That's why we've got in the cell membrane at the top, you've got arachidonic acid, you've got GLA, you've got LA, these are all the omega-6s. Now, what happens is, as a consequence of that, we produce what's known as inflammation in the inflammasome. So you're having a pathological inflammatory change. Because these are all pro-inflammatory, what you're going to get is you're going to get a situation where a stimulus occurs, and they produce what's known as exosomes, or these green, fuzzy-looking, bush-looking type structures, which are called lysosomes, which release their contents. And this is the inflammatory process. Stage one is where you get these ruptured lysosomes, which produce what's known as matrix metalloproteases. Now, what do these do? Well, they actually break down the extracellular matrix, which is basically the matrix which makes up a lot of the cells in the first place. And what they do is they attack those things and they turn it into mush. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the flesh-eating bacteria. Well, the flesh-eating bacteria is producing this substance, matrix metalloproteases. But how do we normally deal with this? How we normally deal with this is that we, in our diet, we have something called polyphenols. And we have these polyphenols from certain foods that we eat. Usually it's legumes or the vegetables or fruits. They tend to have a lot of polyphenols. And what they do is they block the matrix metalloproteases. So they protect us by that food alone. And what the polyphenols also do is they also cross into the cell and they actually manipulate the DNA to prevent the production of metalloproteases. So just imagine now, because we're not getting these polyphenols in our diet, what we're effectively doing is we're causing a massive inflammatory process to perpetuate, because we're not blocking the MMPs, we're not blocking the lysosomal productions, and what happens is you get cellular breakdown. So this slide alone tells you that by not following this nutritional diet that allows us to have these available chemicals at our disposal, like polyphenols, and not having the omega-3s in our cell membranes, that we are creating more problems for us, more chances of inflammation. So I wanted to also introduce this slide, but I'm only going to focus on the left one, which is the type 1 hypersensitivity reaction. This is really to demonstrate how inflammation is a part of our normal lives and how these cells behave. Because if you know how these cells behave, then you can do things to try to trick or do things, or you can learn some hacks to try and avoid these things. So the first slide on the left-hand side shows a cell which is composed of all these little red dots inside. And this cell is called a mast cell. Now these mast cells produce on them these little receptors. And when these receptors have an allergen, like for example, pollen or something like dander from the fur of the animals, when that gets into that complex, which is the complexes that are coming off the cell, when they cause that cross-bridging of these receptors at the top, that causes that cell to release the contents of the mast cell, which causes degranulation, and those substances that get released is what causes inflammation. And that's just to give you an example of how inflammation can occur just by even just having an allergy. And this is one of the mechanisms by which inflammation can take place in our bodies. So this is why it's so important for us to try to address the omega-3, omega-6, and also to address some of these issues. So that's just really an additional slide just to kind of give you an idea. And then these are all the other type of sensitivity reactions, but all of them, if you look at them, all involve some kind of inflammatory change, which is why if you look at all the diseases, they all end with the word itis. Yeah, anything with the word itis refers to inflammation. So now we come on to blood tests. Now, 97% of the people who are having blood tests are all in danger. And why is that? See, what Zinzino have done is they've provided this blood test where you can take a blood spot and send it off. Now, the majority of times when you go to the doctor, now this is another thing you need to understand. When you go and see a general practitioner or you go to an A&E department and you get a blood test done, they will measure markers, which are called things like C-reactive protein or ESR. erythrocyte sedimentary ratio. These are all markers of inflammation, but they don't necessarily tell us what's actually going on behind the scenes, because this particular test, which Zinzino do, is done in a special laboratory. And this blood spot test, which you send off, will give us a result about those omega-3s, those 11 essential fatty acids. And when they work out the omega-3, omega-6 ratio, that in itself is indicative of inflammation. So when they do this test, there is hidden chronic inflammation going on, which we are not able to pick up with the blood test that we have from the doctors. So it's very important that you get this test done. Because if you get this test done, it goes down to the cellular level. And when it goes down to the cellular level, those fatty acids, those essential fatty acids I introduced in the last slide, will give you an indicator as to whether or not there is a disparity in the ratio. And once you know that disparity, then you can address this problem, because this is a silent killer. This is going on behind the scenes while you're getting blood tests back saying, oh yes, my CRP is normal, or my ESR is normal. So unless you get this blood test done, you will never find out why it is you're having the symptoms that you're getting, and why it is that, and then when it gets worse, after you've had this problem for years on end, and then the ESR shows up as being positive, then you're going to say, oh, why didn't they show this up? Why didn't the GP do this? Or why GPs can do this test if they want to, but you've got to ask for it specially. So what are we looking for? What do we find in these tests that we do? Chronic low levels of omega-3 fatty acids. That in itself is an alarm bell. There is actually an index for that. The index is the percentage of essential fatty acid of the total. So if you're scoring less than 4% of omega-3 out of your whole fatty acid, if you're scoring less than 4, then you're actually in the danger zone. If you're between 4 and 8, you're kind of in the intermediate, and if you're 8 and above, you're in the safe zone. So it's very important you realize that, and I'm going to show you that in the blood test that we come across. Low polyphenol input, that's another thing that we find. Low polyphenol input. That is a result of the fact that we're not producing or eating those polyphenols, which are important for blocking the the cell that produces the metalloproteases, which damage our body, and also inhibiting that, which is the second part of the inflammasome, which I described in the last slide. And low vitamin D. Vitamin D is one of those essential vitamins. What does vitamin D do? Helps to build the structure of the bones. It's very, very important. It actually acts as a hormone to a certain extent. So these three things alone is what contributes to chronic inflammation, which is the underpinning reason for why disease processes are occurring. So now we come to what's normal. Ideally, we would like an omega-3, omega-6 ratio of 1:1. Right? Harvard University has stated that ideally you should have a ratio of 4:1. Scandinavian countries. Now, the other thing I need to mention is that these blood tests which have been done, believe it or not, since the since Zinzino have been on the scene, they have managed to provide a way of doing blood tests around the whole world, and they have a database which is approximately 1 million. It's over 1 million people now that they've got results for all over the world, and they are able to pinpoint only the countries that, because it's a double-blind blood test. Nobody knows. Zinzino don't know who it is. The laboratory doesn't know who it is. Only you, the individual, knows. But what they can tell is, you can tell you where you're from, according to country, your age, and whether you're male or female. So with these results, they can design, or they can show, or they can demonstrate the average results across different countries. So in the Scandinavian countries, you're getting an average result of 15:1. Right? Now think about that. Look at where that is. That's right up in the north, in the Arctic. What do you have in the Arctic? You have a lot of these cod and various fisheries which provide the food sources for omega-3. But now compare that to some of these landlocked countries in the south, in Europe, which is 25:1. You can see there is a relationship here. So nutrition and these blood tests are very, very profoundly, intimately related. And this is one of the reasons why we can say that these particular areas are suffering in terms of the ratios of omega-3 to omega-6. There is the EBM, the experimental biology in medicine. There are all these studies which have been done, which will actually show you that the Scandinavian average is 15-1. The average of Central Europe is 25-1. And what we're trying to achieve is a balance of 4-1. What we're going to find is that because of these high levels, death rates due to any reason will drop by 70% if you can get these ratios down. Now, if we look at this slide, the international, we mentioned about the EBM, they've proven that correcting the balance of omega-6 to omega-3 to below 5-1, that the risks of these diseases can actually decrease. Original form of DNA is 1-1, we would prefer. The Western diet we know is 15 to 17-1, and this is because of the vegetable oils and the meats that are preferred rather than fish. Cardiovascular disease, if you can get it down to 4-1, the risk of the death is decreased by 70%. These are the main diseases. These are people die from: cardiovascular disease, colon carcinoma, and breast carcinoma. You get it down to 2.5-1, the risk of developing cancer decreases significantly. The inflammatory diseases, as a result of what I've told you about the ratios. Arthritis is another form of inflammation. Why? Because at the cell level of the bones, the synovial membrane, they become hard and they become inflamed. And this is another reason, because of the omega-3, omega-6 ratio. Reduce it, you reduce the risk of arthritis. Autoimmune diseases, how do they come about? Remember we talked about the bowel? Remember I said to you that when you get leaky gut, you get certain things that end up in the bloodstream? Those things can actually activate organs further down, like the thyroid gland. They can activate various other inflammatory changes which end up causing the body to attack itself, because some of these remnants can actually end up on the organ and lead to autoimmune illnesses. And asthma is a very classic case of that. So by actually bringing it down to 5-1, you can actually change the way in which patients respond. Asthma over the last 100 years has increased. Maybe 1 in 4 people are carrying an inhaler. And why? Because the nutrition that's affecting these children have caused this omega-6 to omega-3 ratio to go out, and this leads to asthma. So another thing that we talked about, so we talked about dysbiosis, we talked about chronic inflammation. Now we come on to the third apocalypse, which is type B malnutrition. Now, type B malnutrition, people who end up becoming obese, they end up producing a lot of adipocytes, which is a lot of these fat cells. And if you look at this, what happens is that you get a lot of infiltration of macrophages into this area, and these then set up inflammatory foci or adipokines, which then go and cause all of this inflammation and perpetuates this problem. And these are pro-inflammatory messengers, which cause inflammation elsewhere. You can see it causes arthrogenesis, which is where you have more of these damage to the cell walls of the veins, of the vasculature. You have increased insulin sensitivity. You have insulin secretion, more insulin. So this is fueling the glycemic mismatch that we talked about earlier. And it causes hepatic steatosis. That is increased fat around the liver. This is also known as non-alcoholic hepatic disease. So a lot of people associate alcohol with cirrhosis. This is now cirrhosis because of deposition of fat. If you eat, for example, a lot of these foods which contain high fructose corn syrup ends up in the gut, and it ends up being absorbed in the body, and it produces a lot of these fats. Insulin levels goes up, they store it as fat, and then you get more of these fat storing systems, and then it causes this hepatic steatosis, which is increased fat around the liver, which is non-alcoholic cirrhosis of the liver. So how can we solve this problem? Well, Zinzino have come up with this product called Extend. And this is where you have balanced oil, tocopherols, tocotrienols, lipophilic carotenoids, amphiphilic polyphenols, which we said was in the food, which we're lacking. These things will help to alleviate this problem. And then last but not least, you have periodontal disease. Periodontal disease, you get, if you're brushing your teeth daily and you're spitting blood out, this is a sure sign that you have periodontal disease. And this will lead to neurodegenerative diseases like strokes. A lot of these toxins end up getting absorbed into the olfactory nerve, which runs in the nasal area, goes up into the brain, and it introduces the toxins there. And this can lead to Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and disease and stroke. And if you swallow some of that into the gut, that can lead to breast cancers and esophageal cancers and pancreatic cancers. So how are we going to solve this problem? Well, the Zinzina have found that if you look at the seaweeds, they contain a lot of these fucoidins, which is the polyphenols that you find in seaweed, and algae, brown algae. They contain these things. And what happens is when you eat these things, they become secreted in your saliva, and it coats the roots of the teeth like a bioteflon, and this can lead to plaques and tartar fading away. And the Japanese studies which have been done have shown that the teeth actually become re-anchored into the jaw so that you don't lose your teeth. You don't actually have to suffer from this anymore. Unfortunately, these are things which are not really addressed in the dental profession, but this is something that Zinzino have also been able to provide a solution for, and it's in the form of this supplement called Xenogene. So with all of these four things, you can see that there is solutions to each and every one of these issues that we talked about. So now we talk about these disease processes. Remember I said to you before, some of these you're familiar with. We'll start with going anti-clockwise. You've got senile dementia. We've already seen that if you don't have enough DHA in your omega-3s, that your cells are going to result in decreased cellular communication. Digestion issues. We've already talked about the gut. We've talked about the fact that to have a good digestion, you need to have good bacteria in your microflora and fauna. So you need to make sure that you try to, make sure that you have enough of these gram-positive bacteria. Hypertension, we talked about the cells, the fact that if they become hard, it has a massive effect on the internal membranes of the vessels, and if they become hard, then you will experience hypertension, high blood pressure. Insulin resistance, when you have, for example, these when you affect the gut and you get absorption of these toxins, they can actually end up in the bloodstream. They can then go to the pancreas and can cause the insulin not to get released. Remember I said that cells produce product? Well, if you've got cells there which have been attacked by inflammatory markers, or somehow the cells there are not producing enough insulin, you're going to get these kind of problems. Insulin resistance because of over-stimulating cells, and then the cells not responding. Varicose veins, again, all of these, each and every single one of diseases, you can actually explain by the mechanisms which I described about how the cell gets affected and therefore can affect each and every one. Sight loss. Sight loss is because of the nerve cells. There are nerve cells which have these abilities for us to be able to transfer information from one cell to the next. If you lose the cellular membrane function, you lose the ability to transfer that information, which can lead to sight loss. Tumor disease. Why are we getting tumor disease? Because some of those inflammatory markers that we talked about, for example, the omega-3, we talked about interleukin-16, LL37, they can actually lead to genetic changes which will actually start to affect how cells divide. It also is very much to do with the mitochondrial cell, the mitochondria which sits inside the cell. If you start to interfere with the way the mitochondrion behave, then that will also lead to cellular division, which leads to tumors. Skin problems, when you have the cells which become hard, then you get the cell membranes, or the cell membranes of the cell, individual cells will affect how the skin behaves. Remember, the skin is the largest organ in the body. So they will also be affected. Cardiovascular problems as a consequence of high blood pressure. Thyroid disease as a consequence of the toxins getting into the blood and causing autoimmune disease like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is where you get markers which attack the thyroid cells and then they can't produce their product. Joint pains, we talked about the synovial membranes. If they're not getting affected because of the chronic inflammation that's occurring in those, then that's going to affect the way you run. In the old days, people used to take a large beating. So, for example, in the 19th century, people playing rugby and all these sports, they can fall down and they wouldn't suffer any major inflammation or any damage. Why? Because they were eating the right foods that made sure that their constituents in their cells were promoting a much more stronger cellular function. You are what you eat. So when you start to eat some of these high omega fats, 6 omega fat containing foods and what have you, and not taking enough omega-3, then you're going to be one of these people that end up having joint pains later on in life. A weak immune system. We talked about the immunity. We talked about how the immune system is very, very much concentrated in our gut, because we have all of these pathogens and all of these other bacteria, good bacteria, which help support that. And if you disrupt that system, then we're going to end up having a weak immune system. Attention deficit hyperactive disorder affecting our children. Why? Because they don't have enough of the DHA in their cells. They haven't got enough DHA. The omega-3 in their cells in their brain is affected, so they will also suffer as a result. And then we have depression. EPA. EPA is there's been a strong link between EPA as an essential fatty acid and depression. People who took EPA, they suddenly started to find that their depression started to become less. So a lot of these things are related to what we eat. So it's very important to understand that. And then the list goes on. Arthritis, we talked about. Eczema, we looked at the allergies. We talked about the mast cell producing inflammation. Sleeping problems, we talked about the melatonin. If you're not producing enough melatonin, you're not getting enough sleep. Dry, slough, cracked skin, we talked about the dry skin. Sterility, abortion, menstrual problems. In the last 100 years, we've seen a massive decrease in the amount of sperm production. We've also seen a massive increase in men not being men because they haven't got enough testosterone. We've also seen women who are producing more testosterone and less estrogen and progesterone. And then they present with things like PCOS, polycystic ovary disease, a very, very real problem. That is related to this. If you don't have enough omega-3, omega-6 ratio, then that is also going to affect those kind of problems. There is a massive link between the gut, when you have those negative gram-negative bacteria in your colon, there's a huge connection between that and PCOS and what I said before about neuroinflammation. Sight loss, dry eyes, again, also related. Neurological, nervous-related issues because of the gut. Weakness, poor concentration, again, to do with how your membrane works, because if you don't have enough your cell membrane isn't properly doesn't have the proper constituents, it's going to affect the way the cell functions, and that will lead to poor concentration because your nerve cells, of which we have about 86 billion nerve cells and about 4 to 6 times that in synapses, those will also be affected. And last and not least, hair falling out because the follicles are not anchored properly into the cell, and then they can also get affected because of the inflammatory changes that have occurred there because we don't have enough omega-3, omega-6. Now we come on to the testing. There's a laboratory which is called the VITAS. They are really the Rolls-Royce of laboratories because they have all the credentials in terms of being a proper laboratory, GMP compliant. They are the ones who are actually involved with a lot of the tests which are done with Oxford, Cambridge University, Harvard, Stanford. Thomas Gunderson, he's the renowned researcher there. They are like the Rolls-Royce of laboratory of results. These are the people who that blood test is sent to. So it's very important that that you get this blood test done, because it will show you how credible that piece of information is, and it will tell you all about your omega-3s in each and every single one of those results we talked about. And then in this slide here, we talk about less than 5% of the people in Europe had an average of balance of 3 to 1. Again, illustrating that this omega-3, omega-6 is a real issue. So Zinzino are able to produce this balance oil, and they have been able to say that the balance of omega-6 to 3 at 95%, having Zinzino products, have changed to 3 to 1 after 120 days. Why do we say 120 days? Because that is the lifespan of a blood cell. So the blood cell usually takes 120 days to regenerate or to break down, and then the new cells come. So this is why they do the test. They do a test before, you have these supplements, they do a test afterwards, and you can see the result. And that's very, very important. How many times have you gone to your GP and your GP puts you on a medication and says, come back for a blood test and see whether there's been any changes? Or you never see that. The only time you see that is when they're concerned that the drug is actually going to cause a problem. So for example, if you're on a statin, they're going to ask you to come back in 3 months' time and have a blood test to see if your liver's been damaged. So that's the difference. We're dealing with supplements. We're not dealing with drugs. We're dealing with supplements that will actually ensure and show you that you're getting benefits from it. And when you see those changes, where you see things going in the right direction, that gives you the confidence to continue in the same way and make sure that you're actually keeping all those ailments at bay. So I just want to sort of finish off by going through this blood test result, which will tell you. So when you have your blood test, this is a 52-year-old male from Slovakia who had his test done. As usual, he had his this fatty acid test profile done, and your target is 90%. He scored 0. His omega-3, what I said to you before, the omega-3 index should be above 4, should be at least between 4 and 8 or above 8. His was 3.7%. Omega-6 AA, this is the arachidonic acid to omega-3. Ideally, you want it between 3 to 1. Harvard say 4 to 1. This guy had it 13 to 8. Arachidonic acid 38.6. This is to do with the coagulation cascade. This is why omega-6 is important as a pro-inflammatory in that respect. Should be above 30%. It's within the normal range. So arachidonic acid is usually, when you get that test back, it's usually within the norm. And then you've got something called the cell membrane fluidity index and the mental strength index, which are basically tests which are done to address those components we talked about the fluidity and about the mental strength. Is more to do with the amount of DHA in the cell, because that is one of the major components. And if you have these a mental strength index of below 1, in which case this goes 2.2, then that tells you that, again, he's going to be somebody who is maybe in a few years' time, when he gets into his 80s, could be prone to dementia. So these are very, very good indexes of what the future has to hold for you if you don't get these results. Now look what's happened afterwards. This is on the 12th of March. This was on the 31st of October. So within 5 to 6 months later, these are results that he was getting after taking balance oil and also taking more omega-3s. You see, his result is now 57% from 0 for the protection for fatty acids. His omega-3 has now gone to 5.8. Now, incidentally, athletes you would expect to be the most fittest individuals on the planet because of what they do. The average that they found for athletes was 4.8, 4.4 to 4.8. So that's 0.4 above what we'd expect as a norm. This guy now, having had Zinzino, this fatty oils or whatever, the balance oil, his result now 5.8. He has an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of 4.4. Slap bangers. He is as fit as an athlete now. And arachidonic acid is again still in the norm. Cell membrane fluidity is now become a bit more less. It's going in the right direction. It was 9.2 before it's gone down to 6.3. Hopefully in a year's time it will be below 4. And his mental strength is going more towards 1.4. So you can see by taking these supplements, by taking these products, you can see that there is proof that you are going in the right direction. This is to show you the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. So if you look at this graph, as I said before, if your omega-3 index is below 4, you're in the pro-inflammatory area, so you're at high risk of disease. Once you get it more towards the 8 and above 8, you're in the anti-inflammatory area, and therefore you would expect to see good results, and therefore you would be not prone to some of those disease processes we talked about. On the right-hand side, we have a study which was done by Zinzino, where they took all those results and they looked at people who had no omega-3, and look what their ratio is, 14.8 to 1. They took people who actually took some of these fish oils, omega-3, but they could only get it down to 9.9. Now, why is that? Well, in the old days, people used to take things like cod liver oil. Now, the problem with that is they're missing one major ingredient, and that's the polyphenols. What happens is, when you eat fish, you have the polyphenol and the fish oils chelated together because they're all part and parcel of each other. When you take fish oil supplements, which they found in a 2018 study by Cochrane. Cochrane is the sort of Rolls Royce of people that do the studies. They discovered that all of these fish oils had no benefit whatsoever. And the reason for that is because they lack the main ingredient that allows it to get into the cells, and that is polyphenols. So what Zinzino have done is they've taken the fish oils and actually chelated it to olive oil polyphenols. Usually in the fish, it's the algae fish oils. Remember we talked about the fucodans from the seaweed? Well, algae contains something very similar, but they're called fluorotannins. And those fluorotannins is what the fish take up and protect them. But we don't get those fluorotannins because when they extract the oil from the fish, they detach the fluorotannins from the fish oil, and we just take the fish oils and we think that we're going to get a good result, but the highest we're going to get is 9.9. So this is the reason why no two fish oils are the same. So when you go to Zinzino and you get their fish oils are chelated to the polyphenols that you get from olive oil. And as a result of that, that's how you're going to get 2.8 to 1. So it's very important. So all of you people going out there thinking that you're getting all the best from all of these fish oils, unfortunately, you're not going to get anything better than 9.9 to 1. So it's very important you realize this. And there was an anecdote about a man who used to eat fish twice a day. He was very, very, but the thing is how many of you are going to be able to eat fish twice a day and not be smelling of fish? How many people are going to say to you, okay, I'm not going to go near you because you smell of fish? So taking a supplement in this case is probably your best bet. So what we have here is, again, an example of why the omega-3 fish oils are not good. They're bad news because a lot of them end up becoming rancid. Number one, it's produced from cultured fish, so you're not even getting the right fish because a lot of the fish now are farmed as opposed to wild type. They come from contaminated areas, so you've got high mercury content. Low quantity of it is in there. They become rancid, and they're not going to be absorbed with the polyphenol. So this is the whole reason for why omega-3s don't work on their own. So this is a bit about the company. There's Origin and Heidel Sale. These are the founders of Zinzino. The company was founded in 2005, based in Sweden. Company was recorded in the stock market, so it's actually a real company. They have over 430,000 clients, which is actually more now, more than 200 employees. 1 million clients are expected by 2025. I think they've already broken that because of the sheer blood test results that we've got out there. And they should expect 10 million by 2035. This is a no-brainer. This company is very, very good at being able to have provided the solutions to the problems we talked about. They do products in balance, which is the balance oil, immunity, which we talked about for the people who have got the type B malnutrition, weight control. They've got foods which allow that, which addresses the glycemic index, and skincare products. A little bit more about the fish oil. They come from wild type fish. They're chelated to the olive pea polyphenols. They contain very nice flavors. A lot of people who used to have the cod liver oil used to complain about the fact that they used to taste rancid and you cannot really, you get a very bad aftertaste. So now they've incorporated these nice oil tastes, which are obviously devoid of omega-6. And you've got the D3 and all the E vitamins that you need, because vitamin E is very important. These are more about the product. So you have these different balance oils. These are the benefits of the balance oils: normal sight, normal teeth, heavy muscle function, healthy skeleton, fighting against oxidative stress, normal blood pressure, normal cell division, normal blood triglyceride levels, decreased blood cholesterol level, protect cells against oxidative stress, normal calcium, phosphor consumption and absorption, normal blood calcium level, normal development of the brain of the embryo, normal development of the sights of the babies under 12 months, normal development of the eyes. And now you know why. Because by having the right omega-3 and the polyphenols, they get into the cell and they address the cells at the cellular level. And if you address the cells at the cellular level, then you're protecting yourself from chronic disease. This is a much more powerful polyphenol containing oil, which is going to boost even better. So you have even better products. This is a little bit more about the different types of omega-3. So you've got here krill oil. So krill oil is very, very high in omega-3s. Trouble is, the oxidation stability only lasts 2 to 3 hours. The next one is concentrated omega-3 with vitamin E mixture. That only lasts 7 to 8 hours. Cod liver oil with vitamin E mixture only lasts 16 to 17 hours before they become rancid. But the one that tops it all is a mixture of fish and extra virgin olive oil with polyphenols. One of the things you've got to realize, by chelating that polyphenol with the fish oils, there's a lot of energy and expense that is used to put that together. Now you get these other companies which will make very similar types of things, but they will maximize on their profits and try to cover their overheads, and they will not produce a good product in the end. But rest assured, Zinzino have got your back, because they're more interested in producing a product that gets results. And the proof is in the blood test results. This is called the AOCS, which is the American Oil Chemist Society, who have done an independent study on all of these types, and this is what they found, that these types of oils last and stand up to oxidation levels well and above beyond 1 day or 2. This is more about the different types of products, the costs, the balance oil. This is the Extend, which we talked about, which is for the treatment of bee malnutrition and also the immune system. It helps to support the immune system, and it contains all of these various beta-glucans, which is the fiber which gets broken down and tries to ensure that you have a colon which is full of those gram-positive bacteria. So we started off with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse: dysbiosis, chronic inflammation, type B nutrition. We now have the antidotes. Dysbiosis, how are we going to address that? Xenobiotic. Take that, two scoops a day, small scoops every day, and that will ensure you get a very decent colon full of nice bacteria. Extend, how is that? That's addressing the type B malnutrition. How does it do that? Because you have the ingredients that's going to help to reverse some of those ongoing inflammatory, perpetuating substances as a result of the adipocytes, which incidentally causes leptin to go down and encourages ghrelin to work more, and you end up perpetuating, getting more bigger and bigger because you just keep on eating, you get more hungry. And then you've got here the balance oil, which addresses the chronic inflammation. So you take these 3 together on a daily basis, and then you can ensure that you've at least addressed 3 of the 4 horsemen. The glycemic mismatch, they've also got products which address that. Zinzino have created some more lean bars and various other bars for that, but it might be something that you might want to take more control over. I think one of the key things here is to make sure that your blood sugar is not spiked. If you control your blood sugar, then you can ensure that your insulin doesn't follow and doesn't end up storing that as fat, and that's how you're going to get on top of that. The problem we have today is a lot of our foods are high calorie intake, but low nutrition. And that is what we need to get back to. We need to get back to what was known as the Victorian diet, where we had very high nutritional input as well as low in the calories. The other thing to mention is that some of these products, these vitamins, and as I said, Extend, they produce a lot of vitamins. You would need to eat at least 3,000 kilocalories a day to achieve the nutritional input that you get from these supplements. So that's something to bear in mind. I don't think everyone has even got enough time to eat that much, but it just gives you an example that these are the shortcuts, these are the solutions to those issues. So this here again is covering the 3 main horseman apocalypse problems: the balance oil, the Extend, and the xenobiotic. This is another Protect, which is again for the immune system. This is Viva. There's people with sleeping issues. Remember we said about the melatonin and all that? This is going to help with that. So they've got a lot of range of products, which is going to help address a lot of problems. But it's very important that you get onto this. And if you can find someone who is a distributor who can help you, then I would definitely encourage you to go on it. The way it usually works is when you buy into this, you get a subscription for at least 6 months, because the reason why they do that and suggest that is because they want you to get the results. You have a blood test before, you follow their regime, within 3 to 4 months you have another blood test, you see the results for yourself, and then you can benefit. So I think we'll end there, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Imran. It was very nice. Thank you. Very thorough explanation, and it explains a couple of things for myself. And I'm pretty sure these people who have been attending this meeting also agrees with me. Thank you so much.
So yeah, I mean, just wanted to say thank you for all of you for coming and attending this presentation. I hope I've shared something with you, gives you an idea about where we should be headed in terms of in the name of nutrition and how we can address some of these issues. So please unmute yourself, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Imran, thank you as always. That was a very thorough, amazing presentation again. Imran, could I just ask regarding the the olive oil they use? Was it a cold press oil in term when they process that?
Yeah, so the olive oil is very, very rare olive oil indeed. I mean, Zinzino have had to actually, isolate one of the best olive oils they could, because it's very important to get the best polyphenol that you can extract it from that in order to chelate with the fish oils. So yeah, I mean, it is they obviously they extract the best of the best of the best, and obviously the only way that we can actually say that, or the only way that we can actually have any real determination of that is when you do the blood test. Because when you do the blood test before and the blood test afterwards, then you'll see the benefits. So yeah, in answer to your question, it is a cold pressed, best of the best oil. Because one of the problems with polyphenols, as you probably appreciate, is if it goes through the oxidation process, it can lead to loads of issues. So this is why they've got to make sure that they really tight regulate that process and make sure they chelate it to the best omega-3s they can get hold of. Because what you don't want is toxins in the system and all the other things that go with it. But yeah, in answer to your question, yeah, it is a cold pressed, very highly regulated olive oil. I just got a message here just to remind me, thank you, Monica, which is 6 weeks before the full ripe olive oil, because that's when the polyphenol content is at the highest. So 6 weeks before the olive is ripe, that's when they actually are able to extract that. So yeah.
Right, thank you. Second question, Imran, regarding the probiotics, and how many counts is, like, how many billions or millions counts are they in terms of the CFUs and are in the probiotics?
Right. So first of all, these aren't probiotics; these are prebiotics. So probiotics, as you well know, is like your kefirs and all of your bacteria.
Yeah.
The problem with the probiotics is one of the biggest problems with probiotics is when they go through the gut, they get broken down and they die. But even if you do get those probiotics into the colon, the next issue is how do you keep them alive? See, this is where the prebiotics come in. So the prebiotics, they come in a powder form, and they're the 4 or 5 different types of you got the small chain carbohydrates, which is your FOS, which is your fructooligosaccharide. Second one is inulin. Third one is the oat beta glucans. And then you've got the other peptide, which is the ones you get from green bananas. So when you mix those together, they ferment at exactly the right time. They had to be tightly regulated in terms of the amount that you put those carbohydrates into the actual supplement in order to cover the whole gut, because you can't have them all fermenting in one particular place. If you have them fermenting in the wrong place, then you're going to get an overgrowth of bacteria in that place. So it's very important that it stretches right around the gut. So in answer to your question, it's more about the ferment delay. The more complex the carbohydrate, the longer it takes to ferment and the longer it stays in the system. So it covers the whole of that from the ileocecal valve all the way up the ascending, all the way along the transverse, all the way descending, right to the anus. So that's the reason why you want to make sure you preserve all the biotics, all the bacteria in that particular field. So yeah, I hope that answers.
That's amazing prebiotic. Yeah, this is very hard to find a good prebiotics as well, especially one
that releases over that whole time. So this is why it's such a superior product. So that's why Xenobiotic is a really, really good product to have.
Yeah, because some of them who, like, you recommend them, like, take a bit more kimchi, take a bit more sauerkraut, kombucha, it's a bit hard as well for them at times. So this is a great product.
But then you see, the thing is, the fermenting process is unpredictable, because obviously kimchi is going to ferment at one particular time, something else is going to ferment. So you need to cover that whole area. So by having a slow loaded small chain first, because the FOS is the first to go, and that's usually within this ileocecal valve up to the ascending. Then you got the next part, inulin, then the next part, the next part. So you can actually build it all around. And that's why you want it. And when you get onto the system, within 3 months, you get a complete turnaround. Your whole microflora has been changed. And any probiotics that you decide to have can also join in onto that. Because remember, lactobacillus is only one colony. You've got multiple different colonies. If you want to preserve that, and this is the way to do it. So you want a very good prebiotic to ensure that you get that perpetuation of all that system. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you, Imran. as always.
Any other questions before we wrap up? I hope I haven't taken up too much of your time. I just hopefully it was an informative.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
What these products are available in vegan version?
Yeah, so obviously you got the products which have they cater for both meat as well as vegan. Some of the vegan products are a little bit more expensive because of the production that goes in line to make it vegan. But yeah, again, I mean, one of the issues with vegan versus non-vegan is, for example, the amino acids which you can get from meat is not going to be there. So you might have a discrepancy of maybe 1 or 2 amino acids. But the important issue is to address the omega-3, omega-6. You can get omega-3s from the fish oils. You can also get omega-3s from the food that the fish eat. So they're going to get it from where? Algae. So you've got the algae which produce omega-3, so you can get it from there. And then obviously we also have olive. So because obviously olive grows on land, and you've got the seaweed which grows in the sea, so the fish get their omega-3, we should be getting our omega-3. So in terms of addressing that, it's not a problem. So you can have vegan products which will cater for people who are vegan and very strictly vegan. So yeah, definitely.
Right, thank you. And probably I have more questions. I can't remember it. I should have been taking notes.
Imran, another thing as well, just a question regarding ordering the test kit, because one of my patients currently is a male and with low sperm count. You mentioned about the other test kit, because I'm trying to get a test kit for him and then get him on the plan. How do I go forward from here?
So in terms of, I mean, obviously with someone who's got low sperm count, obviously you've got to consider, as you've probably well done, all the underlying causes. So it's, the hormone related but obviously, as we've already made a distinction or made a connection between getting the inflammatory markers down, the first bet would be to try and address that omega-3, omega-6. So I would encourage you to get the blood test for the drop test, which is for the omega-3, omega-6. Once you've addressed that and you know that there's a discrepancy, well, then you've got a pathway to follow. So if you can get his omega-3, omega-6 down to a T, then that will be a very good, huge indicator for addressing whether this is somehow related to his sperm count, because it is something which is obviously a cellular degeneration as a result of the things we talked about. So there could be an autoimmune component. I mean, if it is an autoimmune component that has led to a decrease in the sperm count, then that can easily be addressed, because what I would encourage you then to do after you've got the result is then start him on a balance oil, which will address the omega-3. If you can get the omega-3/6 ratio down to at least 2.5 and below, then the prospect of autoimmune disease becomes less. And then also, as you well know, you want to try and establish where the cause of that autoimmune state's component has come in. And it most probably is the gut. So again, it's a question of trying to figure out whether or not he's got any gut related issues. And if there is a gut component, then he needs to also be on the xeno fibers, because that will then address the colon, get his colon cleansed, get it all in clear all the gut issues. So now you've covered both bases. There is obviously other things you can do, like for example, neurological, or there's the immune system. So you want to try and tweak the immune system. So tweaking the immune system, you could use Extend. There's another avenue to go by. But I think the important thing is getting the blood test, because the blood test will give you an indication of whether there is any discrepancy. We also offer, Xeno also offer HbA1c, but that's going down a diabetic route. It can give you some indication as to whether there is an autoimmune component, because obviously, as you know, there's a relationship there. But I would start with the blood test first and then go down that path.
Thank you, because he's one of my patient's partner. I haven't seen him yet, but his glucose level is normal, FSH level is normal, LH is normal, prolactin slightly bit high, testosterone level is normal, SHBG slightly bit low, and same as the DHEA sulfate, slightly bit high. So as you said, go along down that line, as you said as well. So I shall contact you.
I mean, I think the only reason we're being is because, I mean, as you know, as doctors, we only have a certain limitation to what we have access to in terms of our blood tests. So by going for something like this, it gives us a huge indication as to what's happening at the cellular level. So if we can address what is happening on a cell by cell level in terms of whether the membranes are fluid, whether they've got that structure, then that gives us a little bit more in terms of what we need to address. And if, for example, in a few months' time, he gets his omega-3s, omega-6 ratio down, and then he starts to improve, and we start to see an increase in some of those results, then I think you've got grounds to sort of break through grounds there. So that would be a very good way of trying to get to the bottom of why he is in that position as it is. So yeah, definitely.
Right, amazing.
Incidentally, the other thing I was going to say is that there are situations where it might not be a good idea to take the gut what do you call it, supplement, and that would be in examples where patients suffer from SIBO. So if you've got small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, then those patients aren't going to respond properly to the Zinzino product, because the Zinzino product is going to cause the bacteria in the small bowel to invade. So some people might get bloating. So unless you address the SIBO first and get those bacteria back out into the colon by putting them on some sort of a diet which incorporates carbohydrates, which encourage them to detach from the cells. Like, for example, you're familiar with urinary tract infection. We treat them with D-mannose. Why do we treat them with D-mannose? To get the bacteria from the first part of the kidney out, so that they don't, or from the back, so that they can get encouraged to get out of the bladder, so they don't get UTIs. So you want to encourage that to move. So to do that, you can make traditional carrot soup. So if you cook the carrots, they become sweet, and that carbohydrate has shown to have pushed bacteria in the small bowel out into the colon, and therefore you can then start to use the Zinzino product after that. That's not a little tweak or way around.
Thank you, Dr. Imran.
Pleasure.
As Dr. Mark, hi Dr. Mark. As Dr. Mark mentioned the low sperm count, here I can actually ask a question. I know a young lady who is being 30 weeks pregnant, and her results came back quite high. What would be the solution for her? Her omega-3 to 6 ratio is 30 plus. Her cell membrane fluidity is 15 plus, which should be 1 to 1, and the EPR is 90% negative. So it's depleted by 90%. So then what could be a solution for this young mom to be, to actually look after herself? She's complaining about fatigue and tiredness, and for the baby to be developing more healthy attributes.
So I think with that particular patient, what we have to first of all address is the omega-3, omega-6 ratio again. I mean, as you said, the fluidity membrane, all of these things, all of those things that you describe are essentially reasons for why she's in the predicament she's in, because if she's not producing the right hormones and all of those things are going to get affected. Now, there is a formula, I believe, that Zinzino do, which is maternal oil, which is going to be very good from the perspective of helping the unborn child, because what happens when children, the relationship between the child and the placenta is that they will rip all of the omega-3s out of mum. And this is one of the reasons why there is a very big post-natal depression type effect, because what happens is that the baby will, the unborn child, the infant, rips out as much nutrients as it can from mother. I mean, I always say that pregnancy is probably the most biochemically taxing time for anybody, and for women especially. And this is one of the reasons why we always say that whenever you are contemplating getting pregnant, then it's a good idea to try and build your nutritional status as much as you can. So in this particular instance, we're already in her, is she in her third trimester, did you say?
Yes, she's 7.5 months pregnant. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm aware, a lot of the foods that, all of the nutrients that she gets from Zinzino, none of them are you know, none of them, to our knowledge, will cause any harm. If anything, what they'll do is they will help to boost her nutritional status, and by building her nutritional status, it's going to help to alleviate some of the cellular functionality. So what we're trying to do is restore cellular functionality by making sure that she gets those nutrients into the cells. The next thing is going to be the child is also going to benefit, because it will get access to the balanced oils and everything that the mother has. And as I said, there's a maternal balanced oil which is specifically to address that. And then obviously there's a nutrition aspect, which is the gut side of things, which is very important, because we need to get those gram-negative bacteria out. And by addressing that, then you're addressing the underlying cause, the underlying, possibilities of any perpetuation of that. So again, I would say definitely get her onto the 3 system, as well as the vitamins. So I would say
the health protocol you mentioned earlier.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct. She needs to be on that, definitely.
Thank you. And one more question, which is related to a 20-month-old toddler, GIA, juvenile inflammatory arthritis, and is affecting her eye, her knee, and her fingers and toes. What's your overview generally on that one? Also, her result came back 20 plus, so quite high. And her EPA and DHA was really minus high. So what could be the solution for that one, just generally, without you seeing any documentation? But GIA.
Well, again, based on that, we've established then that there is a joint related issue. What I would say is that there are a number of ways you can address that, in addition to Zinzino. I mean, you want to obviously address, again, the omega-3, omega-6. So getting her on the balanced oil is definitely a very good step. Again, gut as well. A lot of these diseases, Hippocrates said, a lot of the disease processes are all originating in the gut. So a lot, and also the fact that being a juvenile, being a child, a lot of children nowadays are subject to a lot of gut-related issues as a consequence, which can manifest as diseases of asthma and autoimmune type illnesses, which can lead to arthritis and all of these things. So again, getting her onto that balance is very important. So the gut issues, again, with the Zinzino fibers, as well as the balanced oil, will help to address that. Also addressing the fact that she's, I think you said her EPA is negative. So yeah, again, the balanced oils are going to help with that, definitely.
Right.
And also
she had some sort of kidney problems as well.
Yeah, I mean, again, without knowing too much about that, I mean, kidney function is going to be another issue, which could be hereditary, could be some sort of degenerative process going on there. So again, addressing these issues is important. So I would go with the same supplements as before. But in terms of the joint, I would also probably introduce something else. You can also get this chondroitin sulfate type nutrients to add on, which Zinzino might not have, to try and address that issue. I'm also trying to think outside the box here, because there are some other products that you can also get that will help to stimulate that growth. I can think of some other products that you could also add in. But if you want to talk to me afterwards, I can give you some advice about that, because I just want to stick to the
Thank you, I
Zinzino product.
appreciate it.
But yeah, there are other things you can add to stimulate cellular growth and cellular regeneration, because I think that's what's important. But like I said, this particular issue is all about trying to address these very underlying causes. So, yeah. Any other questions from anybody else before we end up?
Yeah, Monica, don't give up, because I got one of my patients. You was mentioning about the kidneys, because one of my patients, she had rheumatoid arthritis, very severe, and she was under specialists. And after, I think, months and months histories of diet changes, probiotics, and the acupuncture as well, and her counts from 200 rheumatic factors back down to 20 normal. So it's possible. So the kidneys is also is that governs the organs, that governs the bones in terms of traditional Chinese medicine.
Right.
So there's a role to play in terms of the TCM side of what you're saying about the kidneys. That's the essence from prenatal.
Yes, her mother was pregnant with her when she has been prescribed a very strong BP medication, and probably that, I don't know, I'm just guessing, probably that interfered with the fetus, and was born with kidney dysfunction, and so on and so forth. Yeah, she is very tiny, 20 months right now. So
that's what we call constitutionally weak kidneys, secondary constitutional from maternal.
And she has got the duplex kidney as well. So
right.
Yeah, so she has been fixed so far. Yeah, okay, but thank you so much for your input, Dr. Mark. Thank you.
So any other questions, or should we end up here? Because I'm just conscious of time. I'm conscious that people probably need to go. But thank you very much for coming along. I hope you enjoyed that. I think what we're going to try and do is, if people are interested, we're going to try and do more of these kind of talks to kind of bridge the gap in knowledge and try and get the awareness out there that these are kind of ways in which we can address a lot of these chronic issues. And we can also talk a little bit more about how some of these disease processes are connected, because there is so much literature out there about why we need to be going along this path. So yeah.
Yes, please, Professor Imran.
Yes, we need more knowledge. We need more knowledge and information to be spread, and let us spread to as many people as we could reach, in terms of healing the world in that terminology.
Absolutely. I'm all for that. You're muted. You're muted.
Mark, unmute yourself.
Sorry, thank you, Dr. Imran. He's sending love and peace and wisdom to each and every one of us. Thank you for your service. Love you. Thank you.
As usual, thank you so much for your time, Mark. It's been amazing having you here. So yeah.
Thank you, and looking forward to the next one in the future.
Absolutely. Take care, guys. Enjoy.
Thank you. Have a lovely good night, all of you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.